Welcome to Move to Learn, which is the Handspring monthly webinar series featuring an expert author. This month, Joanne Elphinston, the author of The Power and the Grace, A Professional's Guide to Ease and Efficiency in Functional Movement, is with us. Prior to Joanne's presentation, let's take a look at some of the aspects of how to get the most out of this monthly webinar series. First of all, the questions and answers will be taken at the last 10 minutes of the hour, and we're happy to go 10 minutes after the hour if you would like with your question. The Q&A will be open throughout the webinar for your participation, and then we'll start with the questions at 10 minutes to the hour. You're also welcome to use the chat. However, the chat will not be used for questions. Also, since the webinar is being live streamed to YouTube and also is being recorded, if you participate in the chat, then your chat will also be available for decades to come. The webinar is organized such that we have about 45 to 55 minutes of content presentation. This will include a discussion with Joanne Elphinston and also movement demonstrations, and Joanne will guide you in movement participation. So, we'll use the gallery view often so you can see both participants, and then whoever is speaking will have the spotlight. So Joanne Elphinston, welcome to Move to Learn.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, let me give people some idea of the breadth, the depth, and the uniqueness of the background of expertise that you bring to us. For over 20 years, Joanne Elphinston has been working in training, rehabilitation, in health and fitness professionals around the world. She's an international movement expert and works as a high-performance consultant for professional dancers, musicians, and elite athletes at the Olympic level. As a consultant physiotherapist specializing in chronic and persistent musculoskeletal conditions, her work has underpinned research in projects on hypermobility, related pain, falls prevention, stroke rehabilitation, and sports. Joanne is the inventor, the developer, the creator of the GEMS movement system. Joanne, would you explain the GEMS movement system to us and also give us some idea, the background, the path that led you to this synthesis of information?
Wow, that's a big question, Elizabeth. It really is. So first of all, I'd like to say hi to my GEMS crew because I can see you all checking in here, which is absolutely lovely. I always say GEMS people are just the most amazing people. Now, the pathway has been an interesting one. I've come through from having been a coach. I was a swimming coach, I was a volleyball coach, I was a fitness instructor, I went into physiotherapy. I went through quite an interesting kind of convoluted path and ended up working in lots and lots of different areas and fields, and picked up lots of personal learning along the way, having been active and fallen off horses and crashed on kayaks and done all sorts of things that required a lot of learning. And I went from Australia, which is where I was born and raised and trained, to the United States. I was based in Hawaii, and then from Hawaii I came to the UK, and started off this amazing journey with our European crew over here. So out of all of this, GEMS emerged, and it emerged as a way for us to start bringing together all the different aspects that we need to consider when we just consider the person coming to us. So if my clinical people, that's usually a person who has pain. But if it's somebody who's another kind of movement professional, then people are coming for a variety of different reasons. And rather than just thinking about just the movement itself, we're actually looking at how does this individual say that they come to you with a back pain, whether you're a Pilates teacher or you could be a physiotherapist or an osteopath. The old model used to be, let's look at the back. And now we look at it and say, well, the back is talking to us right now, but what is this context with the rest of the body? How does that relate to what someone has to do in their lives? How does that relate to the environment within which they do it? And then over the top of all of that, we have, what do they believe about it? How do they feel about it? What do they understand about it? And what is their sense of self-efficacy, their sense that they have some say in it? So GEMS actually is it's a very structured way, but it's got a lot of, what I do is it creates a framework within which a professional can be creative based on really sound principles. So they can be holistic and evidence informed and structured and progressive. But it's all about the collaboration between the professional and the client or patient. Yeah, it's about the adventure you have together.
Right. Joanne, I'm amazed at what you've synthesized in such a short period of time, although it's a lifetime of exploration. Would you give an example, say a summary of a case study or a case report that would give an indication of how you apply the GEM format to one of your professional athletes or dancers, or just a patient or client that comes to mind as being an excellent example of your synthesis?
Okay, well, that's an interesting one to think about, because your brain goes in so many different directions. But if I just take perhaps, I'll take an example of a patient of mine who had a specific work environment. They really struggled with neck pain. In their environment, they had to continually look back over their shoulder. The environment actually couldn't be worked with. So we talked about what we could do with it. It was a no-go. Then we look at, well, but why is the neck under pressure? So whenever somebody has pain, the first question I'm going to ask is, why is this structure under pressure? And of course, if someone has an acute injury, we know where that came from. But so many people struggle with pain that, either healing should have happened, it should have been completed, but we still have a problem, or it's come out of nowhere, or it's come on over time. And this is one of those situations. So I'm saying, well, why is this under pressure? And then I realized that this lady can't turn her neck properly, because if I just come back a little bit, she's in a situation where she's got her hips flexed and her thoracic spine extended. And this means that this whole area cannot rotate. To rotate is a very basic principle for GEMS. If you want to rotate, you have to have an axis to rotate around. So if I have my axis here, I need something to rotate around. But if I've actually taken away my axis, now my joints are actually closed and they won't let me rotate, which means that the only place now I can go from is my neck. So my neck is doing so much to try and peer behind me, when if I actually had an axis to work from, I could turn my whole body, my whole rib cage, and carry my neck around. So my neck could do its job and not try to make up for everything else. So we take the initial presentation of the problem, and instead of saying, I'm going to do lots of things to you, and we'll stretch it and we'll strengthen it, and hopefully this problem will go away, instead we're going to say, why is it under pressure? Is it reasonable to expect it to be able to do this? And the answer is no, not reasonable. It's beyond what its physiological range should be. Then who should be helping? Well, it should be the rest of the torso. What does it need to be able to help? It needs an axis. And so if we look at how we went about that, we didn't necessarily say, oh, you need to have an axis, because that for that person is going to make, it's not going to mean anything. So we'll perhaps go through a little exploration and say, well, at the moment, where are we? Well, we're very closed at the front here. And what would happen if we opened the front? How would that change things? And immediately we start to realize there's a relationship between a closed hip and an open hip in what happens here. And so we will start to play with that as a process of discovery together. And as we do that, we can come back and say, well, I wonder how that is in your movement. Does that make it easier? Is it the same? Or maybe you find something else out about it. So a session, a typical GEMS type session, will be one of mutual exploration and collaboration. And in the process of that, then it helps somebody to reframe how they feel about that area. Because usually when someone comes, they feel let down by that area. They don't feel good about it. They think it's a bad area, their trouble area. But if we actually start to now reframe it to say, do you know what, it's been really trying hard for you. And it's doing the best it can, but there's only so long you can do that. And then that starts to change emotionally how they feel about it. And that can change a whole lot of wiring up here in the head. So a little potted example perhaps of how we relate the localized area of pain with the person's function, and that it's quite different to perhaps a traditional way of doing things with stretching and strengthening and maybe manipulating or mobilizing that particular area. So I would say that that's one of the things that led me into the way the book was structured. To make that transition between the wonderful work that people are doing as movement professionals and saying somehow that needs to transition into how people have to cope with their regular lives. So they might be doing exercises and techniques, but does it change how easily they pick up their child, or how easily they carry themselves across the ground or go for a run around the block? Or does it have some kind of transferable relevance to them?
Right. Joanne, I'm captivated by your explanation and the ease of flow with which you demonstrate the concepts that led you to this interaction with your client, with your patient. And I'm really curious to know, how did you go about encapsulating or bringing that kind of multidimensional interaction between the covers of a book, on the pages?
By doing nothing else for a year and a half, pretty much. It's so interesting because obviously I've been teaching. I've been a physiotherapist 30 plus years, and probably teaching this for 20 plus years. So it's been a long evolution. And I would say that this book has benefited from the grace of the clients and patients that I've seen, and the wonderful people who've come on the courses as well, because they've all inspired the problem solving, because the kinds of people that I've always seen haven't ever fitted in the box. So normally by the time someone comes to see me, they've tried a lot of things. And so it's enabled me to say, do you know what? There's no point in doing the same thing again. We need to do something different. And so it's been a real legacy of all of these people that I've had the very good luck to work with over all of these years, but also just being so interested. There's nothing better than just being interested, is there really? And not being afraid to step sideways from what your colleagues might be thinking. Because I think that sometimes we all end up kind of in some kind of box and everyone's marching along and saying this is the way it is. And then over here you might be feeling, there's something else that I'm noticing and I really think it's got value. And everyone's like, no, this is the way we're going. But actually out here, this is the interesting things. If you look at statistics and you look at the bell curve, and everyone's so concerned with getting everybody in the middle of that big bell curve, but the most interesting people are the ones who aren't even on the bell curve. The Olympic gold medalists, they're not on the bell curve. They're the ones out here, the outliers. And so getting interested and comfortable in that space and exploratory, that's also had a huge amount to do with this.
Absolutely every chapter I found had gems for me, and I could appreciate that your principles are relevant to, immediately applicable to a vast variety of movement systems. I found that your approach is not just this is one movement system, this is what I'm devoted to, but an exploration and an appreciation of a wide spectrum of movements. Systems. It was the very last chapter of the book that's completely captivating to me, in which you address the language of the brain, how to cue in order to engage the brain. And I would love to hear more from you about that.
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, thank you for appreciating that. GEMS, always say GEMS doesn't replace anything. It's more like your grandmother's old button box that you can put all your things in, because everyone's doing all this great stuff, and we don't need to replace it. We just need to connect it. And this particular area that you emailed me beforehand, Elizabeth, saying I think this would be a really useful chapter to focus on. This language of the brain, of course, could not be more pertinent at this moment in our history. Because, of course, we're all going through a massive shift, aren't we? And so when we think about people and their movement and understanding that it's not about exercises and techniques, it's about how you sense yourself and the patterns and programs that you're running. It can be your biomechanical availability, so many things, but all of it changes when the emotions get involved. And right now, of course, equivalent emotion would be it's stress, if you can call that an emotion. And for some people, actual trauma is going on and widespread. And here we are, all as practitioners, whether we're people who operate in studios with groups or people who are clinicians who normally work in a clinic. Here we are face-to-facing with people. We can't use the same skills in the same way. And this has really brought into focus what we understand the brain needs for us to be able to communicate, to be able to help someone to give us valuable information, and to be able to then use that to help them to move forward. So this is the critical moment, really, for us. Now, what I'd like to do before launching into that a little bit, because we've all, it's not just our clients who've been stressed. I think we've all experienced some challenges. And so what I'm going to do is just settle us, first of all, just a little bit. And I'm going to ask you just to, with your non-dominant hand, what I'd like you to do is just notice whether you can feel your pulse in your hand. Now, for some people, this will be really easy. And for some people, this won't be that easy at all. And for those people, I say, it's okay. I guarantee if you have a hand and it's a little bit pink, then the blood's going there. So there's no failure at all with this. But what I'd like to do is just invite you to very lightly stroke your finger around the edges of your finger. And just become aware of the exquisite sensitivity that is available, that we don't usually really notice. I'm going to go around the thumb. We're going to come all the way around. Perhaps just trace shapes on your palm. Just feel, where is it most sensitive? Where do you feel the most happening? And then perhaps you'll run it up the finger and then over onto the fingernail. Notice that you can feel through your fingernail, the quality of that feeling. And perhaps we'll come up the next finger and notice the same thing, and notice the difference between that quality in the fingertip and finger pad. And we're going to do the same thing. Make our way up the next finger, the fingertip, and then the finger pad. Feel the difference, and the nail over the top. And we'll take the next finger and down again, and then up the thumb. And down. And now what I'd like you to think about is your hand, as if your skin is like a glove, and you're going to put your glove on. So put your glove on. So your skin is just a membrane, yeah? It's like a glove, a container, and in the container is space. And so inside your little finger, for example, the skin is just an outer membrane, and inside the finger is a whole lot of space. And I'd like you to just connect with the space for a moment inside your little finger. Your skin's just an empty glove. There you are, just connecting with the idea of space in your little finger. And then you're going to make your way up into your fourth finger. And you're going to see, well, is there some space inside that finger? Is there space all the way up to the top of the finger? And then we'll come into the next finger. And we'll see if there's space inside that finger too. And the next finger. Do we have space inside that finger? And maybe one finger is a little less spacious than the other fingers. Who knows? Coming down to the thumb. Again, if you lose contact, then you can come back to using your sensation to say, this is the membrane, the outer casing. Now, what about the space inside? And now let's think about, again, you've pulled your glove on, the whole hand actually is full of space. And now that you've got that sense, I'm going to go again and just think, what can I sense in my hand? Can I now feel my pulse? Maybe we feel other things. We might feel tingling, or we might feel something else. It is the same as it was when it began. And so what we're doing here is we're using what's usually termed an exteroceptive sense of touch, although now they're starting to say it's a transmodal thing, and they're saying it's an interoceptive thing too because of where it lights up in the brain. Mm-hmm. To start bringing us into here, because otherwise we've screamed in from our day, we've sat down, our thoughts are going everywhere, and it's hard to focus. And so what we want to do is land in the body, and the use of touch can be extraordinarily useful in helping someone to actually land and start to connect with their interoceptive senses, and we're going to need that for the experience of embodiment. So this is something that I first did actually with a young lady with trauma, and her body had become a battleground for her. And it was about dominance and the brain and there's the body, and there's no connection between the two. And for us to be able to proceed, we needed to change that relationship. We needed a playground instead of a battleground. So we needed to engender some non-threatening curiosity, and we did this with her. And after a while, she said, I don't think I've ever actually felt my hand before. Like, that's really interesting. What can you tell me about that? And that starts to lead us down a dialogue together, which then allows us in a safe way to start coming into the body. Whereas if I'd used something more provocative, so for example, most of us will go to the breathing first, but actually for her, that would have been way too provocative and way too confronting. So we came somewhere else to allow her to become curious. And then we started to play with, what can you do with your hand, and all the different possibilities. So then she starts to get her creative brain working, which we need to do because her trauma brain has been in control. So now that we've done that, let's talk about this effect that's going on with people right now. And I like to try and do it in the least complicated way possible, because when we have stress, and now at this point, it's becoming chronic stress. We've been doing this COVID thing for some time now. So if we just think about the group of structures that makes up where our emotions are largely processed, so our limbic system, and I'm just going to call it the emotional brain now. So if we've ticked off, there's the name for it, we're just going to call it the emotional brain. And then we're going to talk about the prefrontal cortex, which we'll call our thinking brain. Okay, I know that thinking happens from all sorts of places, but it's easier than prefrontal cortex. But when we're under stress and all the way up to trauma, then the emotional brain starts to really upregulate, and it can actually impair the functioning of our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex. And you might think, well, why is that important? Well, memory, being able to stay focused, learning, all of those things, our executive functions. And suddenly we've been mind-jacked, and our emotional brain is in charge. And so let's say, for example, someone is tuned in on Zoom with you as your client, or one-to-one. And the very first thing we need to be aware of is not just their regulation, but our regulation. Because many of us have been thrown into a very unfamiliar situation. And we don't have our normal tools. And so it's very tempting for us to go, I need to make sure that they get good value from this session. So I'm going to tell them all of this information I have, and I'm going to give it to them. And then they will think that they're getting great value. And the poor person's there glazing over, because their prefrontal cortex isn't working. And so we have to start with that, with what is it that we're aiming to achieve from this session? Are we aiming for learning? Are we aiming for someone to just feel more resourced, more relaxed, and more able to cope? What is our motivation? Because that is going to change how we then manage the whole rest of the interaction. Okay. Now, the next thing, of course, now at this point, some of you might be thinking, my regulation. Well, what I can say is if you're finding that it's difficult to remember things right now, suddenly your memory seems to have gone to pot, you can't seem to focus anything, you're watching lots of webinars, but you can't remember any of it, and you don't seem to have any creativity when you really, really need it, you probably don't have early onset dementia. Yeah, this is probably completely normal, and you're having this experience, and that can make us feel a bit squeezed when we come into the professional relationship that's going on in your session. Okay, so there we are. We have to work out how we're going to communicate. We are not just going to take our science information and try and just do a direct download to the other person. It's not going to work, because that is not open for business. So we need to do something else. So I'd like to just talk about a number of different aspects or approaches we could use. Okay, so the first one is storytelling. And I always encourage everyone who works as a movement teacher to become a really great storyteller, because our brains are wired for stories. It's how we used to share our heritage and our histories and our information, so we understand stories. So let's say, from me, my client comes and they have leg pain. And they think it's a really bad leg, and they talk about it as their bad leg, and they feel really let down by the leg. And I notice, looking at them and making them move a little bit, that they seem to prefer to put their weight on that leg. And so actually that leg is taking more load. And so I'll say to them, here's the thing. If you work in a team of people and you're finding that you're having to pick up the slack for somebody else all the time, and this goes on, and you start off muttering a bit, and then you grumble a bit, and then you go up the scale and it turns into a bit of whinging and complaining in the coffee room. And this will keep going up until you're finally screaming with frustration because you're having to do somebody else's job over a long period of time. How do you feel? By this time, they've become engaged in the story and they might start to smile. And it's just like, okay, can you see where I'm going here? I'm like, maybe. It's just like, so actually it's a really good leg, isn't it? What we need to do is go and kick the other one out of its hammock where it's been reclining lovely, you know, having a lovely time, and say, listen, come on, bozo, it's your turn. We need to do something with you. So what we've done here is we've engaged them in a story, which has also then engaged their emotional system and started to try and mobilize that out of where they've been. So we have storytelling as a possibility. Yeah, we could do it the opposite way if they don't want to weight bear on that leg. And it is the sore leg. And then it's a case of, well, let's see how connected you are to your foot. Does it feel like there is actually something to stand on? Well, no. Well, your brain's so smart. It's like, well, why would I go and put weight over there if there's nothing to stand on? I'm going to choose to stay over here. So actually we can celebrate how smart your brain is and give it what it needs to make a new choice. So we're constantly dialoguing and storytelling to help somebody to reframe this for themselves, because the scientific information is brilliant, and I'm not saying you can't give it. It's just that we're going to use a slightly different way to express it. And that's very much what I tried to do with the book, because it's very easy to write scientifically and factually, but then whoever's reading it has to do the heavy lifting to try and work out, well, how am I going to translate that into something that's going to be meaningful for somebody else? So it's why it hasn't come across as a very kind of worthy, take me seriously book. The information is there, but we have to find a way to make it meaningful.
Yes.
So,
and I'm so appreciative of the elegance, the artfulness with which you integrate so much understanding of what constitutes a whole person. I'm also aware that you've been at this for decades, more decades than even your professional bio recognizes. And I understand that in order to seamlessly weave storytelling, in order to engage the patient emotionally, and a high degree of professional specificity in terms of biotensegrity, et cetera. Do you have some guidance for movement practitioners and physios who are on their path but haven't yet reached such a level of expertise, how we can use this book in order to guide us towards that level of mastery?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, the first thing is, you know, when people are on the path, we always feel like we don't know enough. Always. I remember a young lady coming to a course and about somewhere in the halfway through the course, she said, when does it ever stop? And bless her, I'm just like, it doesn't ever stop. Her whole face just went, because just when you think you know something, something changes. And so the first thing is to be regulated in yourself, that you come calm, and that we come in a way that actually meets a person where they are. So, you know, try to fit them into a model of something that you've learned. We sometimes feel we have to do that. But actually, if I find that somebody instead really is able to sit with someone, well, let's explore this together, this actually starts to come together quite organically. So when we teach it, we don't teach it as a new model to replace the old model. It's about how do we start asking questions in a way that helps somebody to actually engage this process for themselves. So it's not something that I'm bestowing upon them, it's something that I will invite. So here's an example. Let's say that practitioner that you're speaking about thinks, right, what this person needs is breathing. And there's a million different things you could teach, isn't it? I mean, and right now everybody's online teaching breathing in all its glory, and it's all fabulous. But you know, sometimes it's just really tough. Even, you know, I've had patients who have been taught box breathing, you know, the square breathing, 4, 4, 4, 4, and they can't do it, and they get more distressed because they're failing at breathing. I mean, heavens, if there's one thing you'd think you'd be able to do by this point as a human being is breathe, and it turns out they can't do that. How distressing is that? So if I use this as a little jump off to do a little practical together, I'm just going to take my big chair out of the way so that we have my little chair here. And I'm going to invite you to do this with me, because you can end up with a barrier and you can be trying so hard to communicate and teach people about what their diaphragm should be doing and what their ribs and everything else. But their strength and their posture is locking them out. And so you spend all that time trying to achieve something that was never going to happen. So let's just look at it. I'm going to invite you to think about this whole area here as, again, a big container. It's going to contain space. We're going to call that your inner space. And we can choose to fill it. We can choose to push it into different shapes. We have lots of choices with our inner space. And so before we start, I'm going to ask you just to take a breath of your own and just find out where in this big inner space I have. Do I fill? Where does it go? Does it go forward? Does it go backwards out your back? Does it go sideways? Can you feel it pushing here or maybe just pushing here? Where is the breath right now? And for my example client, they might say, well, I can't seem to get any breath in. I might be up here, and I'll say, okay. And I notice that either they're very slumped or often when people are stressed, they come up here. You know, I was one of them, you know when I'm stressed, I'm ding, you know, and everyone says, oh, haven't you got lovely posture? It's not lovely posture, it's stress posture. Okay, so let's just experiment with this for a minute, and you're going to come back to your sitting bones again. And wherever you are, doesn't matter, but I'm going to invite you to roll over the front of your sitting bones so that your sitting bones are pointing backwards. And we're going to take a breath and work out where in my inner space does the breath go. And it doesn't matter actually what they say, but what you're likely to expect is that they won't really feel much back here. They might feel something here. And I'll just be interested in what they say. And then we'll invite them to roll over the other way. So now we've got our little sit bones pointing forward, and we're going to fill up our inner space again and find out, well, what shape is this now that my air is taking up? Is it going more towards the back or more towards the front? What's happening now? And often they'll tell me, actually, I can breathe more easily here. And then I can say, well, that's an amazing discovery because the biggest part of your lungs is back here. Really? I didn't know that. Yeah. So we're engaging that prefrontal cortex is starting to flicker online again. And I'll say, well, let's see if we can find somewhere in between these two places. And we'll see what that does with your inner space. So we start to play with it. We could do the same thing if we use the sternum. The same thing will change the availability. Notice that I'm not talking about anything specifically anatomical or physiological. It's not that I don't, but in this situation, I'm not going to, because as you said, Elizabeth, this person may be earlier in their journey as a professional, and maybe they're not so sure about that side of things, but it doesn't mean that they can't do amazing work. Because what they've done now is they've invited this person in, and this person has now made their own discovery, something they never knew before, and that they can change how easy it is for them to breathe. And often they'll tell me, oh, actually the way I normally stand or the way I always sit, that would be hard because actually I can't move there, but I could go somewhere else and that's easier. Perfect. And then maybe you could bring in your breath rhythms or your something else, because it's all calm and you've done it together, and their discoveries have value and they've learned that from you. And so it takes the pressure off you as a professional, because that was one of my compelling reasons with the book, to put it together, because there's so much information now that we're expected to assimilate. You know, we can't be experts in one system anymore. We have to know all the systems and somehow weave it together, and it's tough. But if we keep it grounded in the interaction you're having with the person and you explore this together, then it starts to reveal itself. They start to explain, for example, if they're in an occupation or a sport, oh, actually, well, this position's a problem, but now I notice that we've done this, that makes sense, it connects to this, and they're telling you. You may know nothing about what they do. I'll get a pole vaulter coming, never met a pole vaulter before, tell me what you do. And then you'll do something with them, and they'll go, oh, well, that relates to this, that's amazing, and you'll think, great. It wasn't because I knew anything about pole vaulting, but we've put in place a process for somebody to be able to start making these connections for themselves. So does that answer your question, Elizabeth?
And more. And more. And it also brings on another question, which you are welcome to deflect, dodge, or just recommend something else you'd rather talk about. But given that you've mentioned that, and we are all feeling that we're in such uncharted territory, such new areas of experience, personal and professional, do you have some predictions or some sensibilities regarding the directions for the value of our professions as movement educators and manual therapists? How do you see our expertise evolving to this new era?
I see the opportunity for a flowering, actually, because I think that it's forcing us to engage with things that perhaps we have thought, I could look at that, but I won't. We have our little niches, don't we? And a wonderful example is actually one of my wonderful experienced James practitioners, and he was feeding back to me that, he's realized now working with people online, he's slowed down. He's not doing as much in a session, but he's doing it with greater depth and with greater time for people to make their own discovery, which wasn't happening in the person-to-person, face-to-face situation, because we all go in there with an agenda when we've got something that we want to get through, and so it forced a change in the practice, but actually it forced a change that was very empowering for the clients. So in this situation now, working, especially when we're working remotely, this is the time where we move from the traditional, we learn to be an instructor and then we learn how to correct people. And that's very traditional. But what we move and evolve into is we are now acting as guides and collaborators to help to shift people into the driver's seat. I mean, certainly in therapy, everyone wants to say, oh yes, we must, put the patient in the driver's seat, but then we don't necessarily enable them to do that. Now we have to, because they are absolutely our partners in this process. We can't do it any other way. Now, as movement professionals, I mean, we're all amazingly well suited to the situation, even though it's different for us and we've had to make some changes, because we're able to assess people's movement. make adjustments in our cueing, and then reassess with movement, then we're actually ideally placed. And it's been so interesting for me, for clients who would normally expect to come for something hands-on, and just like, we can do this. They've been very surprised. We're doing something different to what we would normally do. But new discoveries are being made that perhaps wouldn't be being made if we were in the face-to-face situation. So we have an opportunity now to develop skills that are really aligned with where the current science is going, in terms of what's happening with our brains, how we learn, how we adjust and change. We're being forced into it, some of us. Some of us love that stuff. I enjoy it. If I talk to you about associations, we haven't even touched on the possibilities of changing the output just by changing a word or an image, or even just how we're coming to it. The difference for somebody who comes to a class and thinks, I need to focus on this, compared to somebody who's invited to say, I wonder what will happen if ... changes the entire program before we've even started. I remember having an apron that said, dance like nobody's watching. I think everyone's heard that term. Well, that was so far ahead of its time, because actually, just by saying that, it changes everything that you're going to create in your movement output, just with that one attitude. And so learning to craft what we do is such an opportunity, so rich, I think. So, I think it's an opportunity, and also one for us to become much more aware of how we regulate ourselves, that we make sure, because, people are looking at our faces very, very keenly. And that activates other processes in them. And so our self-awareness now becomes a major tool. So it's not just about what we do with our hands, but how we actually bring our whole selves to the interaction. So I think we have lots of potential here.
I'm heartened just hearing your view of the future. And it helps, just your presentation of it helps me to reframe into an optimistic state.
Oh my gosh. Well, just watching you, I feel calm just watching your when your videos online, you're the queen of regulating. I know that you take care of your own self-regulation, coming to the space. And so, you're a master of this, yourself. And, I would encourage people to watch you to see how the rhythm, what you're very specific about is vocally, not just the tone of your voice, but the rhythm with which you're delivering. And this is, again, part of the art of what we're doing. It's not just what you're saying, but it's extremely specific how you say it, how you deliver it.
Thank you very much for those compliments. You and I are certainly in an orbiting of appreciating the other.
It's such a nice thing. What a lovely experience.
Now, you made reference to the science and the art.
Yeah.
And I've been noticing recently in this deluge of webinars from Fascia Research Society and from British Fascia Symposium that the terms of proprioception and interoception, particularly interoception, and how these two processes are blended in our embryological development, etc., really makes it so important to bring interoception and proprioception into the client's experience, which I know you do in chapter 15. So would you speak about your process of directing and connecting interoception and proprioception?
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a big question.
Given that we've got 3 minutes, let's just get to it.
Hanging on there, absolutely. Okay, what I'll do is I'll do a little quick illustration of a recent patient to just kind of pull that together. The patient is a dancer. She's been treated for hip problems and treated as a hip patient and done hip things. She's done every glute exercise you could possibly imagine. She's very mobile, but she's not hypermobile, so that's not a consideration. But you know, these problems keep going. And what was interesting is asking her about her body awareness, and she said, I've got very good body awareness. And as the process unfolded, it turned out she knew where her body was, but had no idea how her body was. And this was a massive moment for her. We actually did our body tracking just to see if she can make connections with all of herself without moving, but without movement. She didn't really have a sense of herself. She knew where her limbs were, but didn't have any sense of herself, and was actually able to make a distinction between the two. And she's, I mean, that's somebody who is very aware, you know, and often the average person is not. But again, it comes down to our language and being quite specific in how we question things. Yeah, there's nothing worse than someone saying, how's that? And the person goes, okay. And so there's been no quality information in that exchange whatsoever to go further. But if we ask for comparison, what is this like compared to that? We start with connecting, and then we might start to get a little bit more proprioceptive. And then we can start to understand a bit about the quality of it. And also, of course, our emotions and our interoception are very, very keenly connected. So when people are showing you apprehension, for example, this is very much a feeling about something. It's not about where it is yet. So if it's someone who's dislocated their shoulder before, then they know they don't want to go there. Their arm hasn't even moved. It's not about proprioception, but they have a very strong feeling coming from this part of their body. And a very strong feeling that's being generated with all kinds of circuitry up here. We have to change that. And so I'll use things like associations to do that. So I'll get them to think of something that is pleasurable, something that gives them, makes them feel, you know, happy, safe, whatever it is. Interestingly, lots of ladies pick chocolate. You know, it could be sunflowers, it could be, you know, snow falling, it could be anything, it doesn't matter what it is, but you hold that thought and it changes the output in the motor program. And even if I'm just asking someone just to lie there and be with that, we're changing the emotional content, and that's actually influencing the interoceptive experience as well. So it's funny because whenever someone says, oh, that's just a visualization, they're not realizing that actually it's one of the most powerful things. If you can find something that's emotive and meaningful, and it's emotive and meaningful if it's theirs, that they've generated it. So I don't say, try to imagine this, because it may have no emotional connection to them whatsoever. But if I ask them for their word, their image, then that changes it. And there's some interesting research around people actually selecting their meaningful words and how that changes their appreciation of their own heartbeat. So obviously, you know, they need something relatively easy to study in a research. So the heartbeat, as you know, is what people tend to look at. Can you sense your own heartbeat? But by actually holding or finding these words that are meaningful to that person, they found they can actually sense themselves much better, just as they can by looking in a mirror at themselves. And that's interesting too, because people say, do you use mirrors? I never use mirrors because it's all about body awareness. I'm like, well, you know what, there's more to it than that. Because if I can help someone to get a sense of themselves, if they look at themselves, then I'm going to start there. And it doesn't mean we're always going to use the mirror, but sometimes it's going to be really helpful from that standpoint to help with that interoceptive connection. So lots of little things there just to throw into the mix.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I know that when I go back and reread or restudy different aspects of the book, that I'll find more more guidance towards these synergies. So we have some questions from Pauline Cole asks regarding the hand touch sensation glove experience. Have you ever tried this approach with CRPS patients?
I haven't used that specific one with regional pain syndrome patients, but I've used other versions, I would say. And so it's not that I haven't used it because I didn't think that that would work. It's just that the patient hasn't come up to use that specific one with. But I would use something like that if it came up to see if we can actually change some of that wiring. It's an excellent question.
Yes, Pauline Cole, thanks you for that. Yes. And another question, this one from Michael Hall. Any thoughts regarding mirror neurons and entrainment when working with clients? Michael Hall says he's a Mike Squash coach, Mind Factor performance coach.
Okay, I'm not quite sure, like exactly if I'm going to like nail down then the essence of the question, but with mirror neurons, absolutely, I haven't mentioned them, but they're absolutely critical. They're critical in terms of our movement, and this is why, you know, I always encourage, you know, our movement professionals to actually attend to themselves in terms of what they're projecting. Because I always say that probably 70 to 80% of my effectiveness has nothing to do with a technique or a cue, but what I'm projecting. But also facially with our mirror neurons, because that's very tied into our social engagement system, our vagus nerve. And so, for example, when you're walking into a class situation and the instructor's at the front kind of in their own little esoteric zone, it gives you maybe some feeling. But if that person actually greets you with something that's giving me social engagement, you immediately start to feel calmer because it's actually working in that vagus nerve, the parasympathetic system starts to fire up. So we mirror off our faces, you know, all the time. And there's cultural differences, of course, but certainly in our culture, we expect to have a response from somebody that's quite similar to ours when we speak to them. So again, if we are actually being mindful of what we're actually transmitting, so that it's actually hitting those mirror neurons, as well as what we're doing in terms of our movement, because we find that the mirror neurons actually are helping us to learn more quickly because they take some of the content automatically. So content like rhythm and the direction of the movement impulse and the amount of tension relaxation, these are all things that are difficult to articulate and difficult to comprehend cognitively, but our mirror neurons take it on effortlessly. So again, if Mike is actually demonstrating something beautifully, efficiently, effortlessly, then a huge amount of that content can come across to the other person if we've actually already given them permission to relax and not judge themselves. If they've already set themselves up into the try hard, must focus, must achieve place, I find that the mirror effect can be very much diminished. So I would say the caveat is how you've set up the interaction to see if you can get the maximum effect. What a wonderful question from Mike.
Indeed. And I noticed that there's some really pithy comments in the chat, but just to remind people that if you have a specific question for Joanne, to put that in the Q&A, so that it sort of saves us from going through the rabbit Warren maze of the chat. But perhaps, Joanne, if you find something that's of interest to you in the chat that you'd like to speak about. Hillary, may we have the slide for Joanne's book, the content for the ordering information for Joanne's book, and also how to contact her, and then we'll come back and take more questions. So Here's the information regarding the discount code for ordering Joanne's book, The Power and the Grace. And a reminder also that our next webinar in a month from now will, or less than that, will be Wednesday, June 10th, featuring Judith Aston. There's also information on this slide on how you can get in touch with Joanne if you have if you have some follow-up material from this webinar, or would like to schedule a consultation with her. And here's her website and the ordering material for the book. Thank you, Hillary. And now we'll come back to Joanne, and I think that we can take another few minutes here to discuss whatever's at the top of mind, and also to have summary comments, and then on to the rest of your evening or day.
I see one here from Mary Lou Stillwell. She asks, any thoughts on how to get teenagers to assign an emotional word to what they're feeling or going through during a session? What a great question, because teenagers are not known for their communicative natures, are they, at all? The big thing to understand with teenagers is that this kind of question is often seen as a threat. And so we need to make it as non-threatening as possible. And actually the population that is quite similar to teenagers from my back history is working with professional footballers. I don't know what country you're in, Mary Lou, but it could be soccer. Same thing, because these people often get put into an academy at the age of 9 and never asked a question after that. They're just told what to do. So if I ask them a question like this, very much like a teenager, the very first thing I'm going to get is, don't know. And I'll go, great, well, do you know what? We're going to do this again. And same thing with the teenager. But all I'd like to know is, does it feel different between when we do it this way or that way? So we're not asking about deep emotional feelings here. We're building trust. Yeah, unless we build trust, they can't dare to give us anything more than that, even if they could identify, because sometimes they don't even know how they're feeling. So I might make it really simple. I'll say, okay, let's see. If you have your weight on the outside of your foot and we look at swinging the other leg, is that different to being on the inside of your foot? What is that different? Oh, it is different. I'm more off balance this way than that way. Oh, really good. Excellent. They've got it right. They couldn't get it wrong because there wasn't a wrong answer. There's only what they're experiencing. And I'm going to go, awesome. Well, I'm going to lead them down the path a little bit further. Is it this or that? And people get confused between open and closed questioning because people have got the idea we should never use a closed question. They must always be open. That's great if you aren't a teenager because you're swimming around and they don't know what you want. They don't know what you want them to express. So you're going to make it really simple and really build enough trust that they then volunteer something for themselves. And this does actually happen quite nicely. But it's our responsibility to put that safe space around them and give them questions that they cannot get wrong, because this starts to build self-efficacy. So in our teenage years, self-efficacy is critical. And Albert Bandura's work has been around a long time. And he says you have to experience mastery experiences. You have to experience getting it right to dare to think that maybe I could get it right again. So it's just a small capsule answer for you, but I just love the fact that you've brought up teenagers. I love working with teenagers because of this challenge. But they also can really respond if you can actually create that safe space for them. And just be mindful of questions where you don't have an agenda, because whatever they tell you is their experience and it's going to be right. And that's my assessment of that one. So thank you for that question, Mary. Awesome.
A couple more questions here. One from Barana Tosca. She says, amazing to listen to you, Joanne. Here's her question. What are your best tips for getting better interoception in the hips and generating more powerful movement from there?
Oh, Barana, I could talk for a week on that one. That's a big question. The first thing is to have hips, we need feet. If they're available. Of course, if you're an amputee, it's a different situation. We're going to work it from a different standpoint. But let's just say that, you know, the average person coming in with hip issues, if I don't actually have them able to get the reflexes in the soles of the feet talking to the system, then how they actually hang on to themselves in space is going to hugely affect their hips. So the dancer I talked about, who knew where she was but not how she was, in standing, you looked at her, her quads were contracted, you know, everything was, her glutes were contracted, everything was on. You're not going to have any sense of your hips there because you're being held with high levels of tension in a position. So I would say the very first place is, do we have that connection to get the reflexes, the positive support response it's called? I talk about it in the book. Because actually hips are a major issue for so many people. So I've actually spent several chapters talking about different aspects of how we own our gravity to start off with. You know, how we can actually place our body on our hip, then we can sense ourselves. But if we don't have any sense of where our body is over the hip, then everything else is just, people find themselves just fiddling about, trying to put their pelvis in a certain position and never getting a sense of where it is. And as an aside on, if we take it to the stress, there's certain things that can happen in stress with the hip. So just for example, I'm there doing my stir fry, you know, and then I suddenly realize, what the heck? My glutes are squeezing crazy. Like, what is going on back there? And they're like, well, you're really distracted and you've got a lot on your mind, so we're helping. I'm like, well, thanks for helping, but shall we just let that go for a minute? Because if you're still with us, everybody out there, if you stand up for a minute, and I'm going to just push on back here again, and I just need to go a bit further back. Let's go all the way back here. And you just get aware, first of all, about where your feet are on the floor. And then I'd like you to get a sense of your breathing. You don't have to change it, just notice it for a moment. And then I'm going to get you to squeeze your glutes. And so the first question is, what happens to your breathing? And most people say, oh, now I can't draw a full breath. I'm like, no, you can't. So if we go back to the person we talked about at the beginning of the session, who's doing all of their 4-count breathing and not getting anywhere, and this is what's happening, then there'll be a reason for it, because your hip is one of the major absorbers of the motion that's created with breathing. So if we actually clench the glutes and squeeze them and keep them tight in standing, we take that away. You might also notice if you relax, the feet come back to the floor, we tense up the glutes. The femurs want to rotate externally, they're now on the outsides of the feet. So I'm no longer grounded. If I want to step forward into a lunge, I'm going to step forward onto the outside of my foot. The only way I can get onto my full foot is to let my knee fall inwards, and now it looks like I've got a control problem. But actually what I had was a tension problem that was actually creating this whole problem. So of course that unfortunate person then gets told to do more glute exercises because they haven't got knee control. And round we go. So again, coming back, and one of the big things that we're always teaching, the little things are the big things. So when people are coming with hips, I'm looking at feet and breathing to start off with. Now, where is this human being so that their hips actually can be in a position in their hip joint that will give them somewhere to develop their power from. Okay, so it's kind of a long answer, but it's a really big area, and it's something I'm looking at developing some more online work for, because so many people are struggling with those hips. There's more to it than glute exercises.
Exactly. Joanne, we are approaching, we're approaching our 10 minutes after the hour, so that we've gone with all this excellent and engaging content from you. We could go on. I know that you have some more webinars coming up. So could you just let people know where they can find you in the next few days, weeks?
Okay, so tomorrow I'm doing a webinar with Hadrian Stiff. Now, he's the coach of the world #1, world #4 squash champions, world #7 women's champion. Hadrian and I go a long way back in the whole GEMS world. Now, that one's going to be recorded and will go up on the GEMS YouTube channel once it's done, because I think it's quite filling up fast. So that's tomorrow night. 2 weeks time, I've got another webinar that's going to be interesting. It's a new podcast coming up. I will receive the link. If you click onto my GEMS Facebook page, we'll put the link there. I've been asked to come and talk about taking the experiences of working with the elite performer and then synthesizing that into what would be helpful for the everyday athlete or the developing athlete. And so that's what I love to do, is actually take those experiences and put it in everybody's hands. So that's going to be Monday after next, 8th of June. That's just been finalized. So I will post the link on the GEMS Movement Facebook page, and we'll also put it on the website as well for you.
Wonderful. Joanne, thank you very, very much for this engaging time. I'm so inspired to even to go back to the book. And thank you everybody for joining us, for engaging in the chat and with the Q&A. And we'll look forward to seeing you in June for the next monthly webinar series with Handspring Move to Learn with Judith Aston, the expert in the expert author, leading us in movement and discussion then.
Oh, I'll be amazed. I'll be a part of that one. I'll definitely want to hear what Judith's got to say.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Stay in touch with Handspring for Move to Learn.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody. Bye.